Captain Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of his ship. The ship was called the Valiant. It was a military vessel that protected Earth. Daniel looked at the screen in front of him. The screen showed another ship. This ship was different. It was bright red and looked very strange. It belonged to aliens called the Zalthar. A woman walked up to Daniel. Her name was Karen Phillips. She was a lieutenant, which meant she was an officer too, but not as high-ranking as Daniel. Karen had worked with Daniel for 3 years. She knew him well. Right now, she looked worried. Karen spoke to Daniel in a quiet voice. The alien ship was calling them. The aliens wanted to talk right away. They said it was very important. Daniel nodded his head slowly. He had heard about these aliens before. The Zalthar Empire was powerful and mean. They had taken over many planets. They never lost a fight, but they had never met humans before. Daniel told Karen to let the aliens talk to them. The screen changed. Now it showed the face of an alien. The alien was huge and scary looking. He had 4 eyes that glowed blue. His name was Vextar. He was a commander in the Zalthar military. The Zalthar were very tall, almost 8 feet. Their bodies were covered in hard armor like an insect. Vextar started talking. A computer changed his words into English so Daniel could understand. Vextar called humans primitive. That meant he thought humans were stupid and backward. He said the Zalthar Empire wanted Earth. They wanted all the human colonies too. Humans had 2 days to leave Earth. If they did not leave, the Zalthar would kill everyone. Vextar said resistance was useless. Fighting back would only make things worse. A young man named Gregory Blake sat at another station on the bridge. He was an ensign, which meant he was new to the military. Gregory looked scared when he heard what Vextar said. Other people on the bridge looked worried too. But Daniel just raised one eyebrow. He did not look scared at all. Daniel thought about what Vextar said. 2 days, that was 48 hours. Why did the aliens give them exactly that much time? Daniel asked Vextar about this. Was it some kind of rule? Did all alien armies give warnings like this? Daniel sounded curious, not afraid. Vextar looked angry. He said humans were arrogant. That meant they were too proud. He said humans did not understand how powerful the Zalthar were. The Zalthar had conquered 473 worlds. Their shields were so strong that human weapons could not hurt them. Their ships were fast and deadly. Humans had no chance of winning. Daniel pretended to think about this. He touched his chin like he was considering Vextar's words. Then he asked another question. What was the longest time it took the Zalthar to conquer a planet? Vextar seemed proud to answer. He said there was a species called the Korthan. They fought for 3 months before the Zalthar destroyed them. The Korthan were good warriors. Humans would do much worse. A woman named Rachel Morrison stepped closer to Daniel. She was the science officer on the ship. Rachel whispered something to Daniel. He listened and nodded. Then he turned back to look at Vextar on the screen. Daniel started to explain something to Vextar. He said humans had been fighting each other for 10,000 years. That was a very long time. Humans fought with simple weapons like sticks at first. Then they made better weapons. Eventually, humans made nuclear bombs that could destroy entire cities. Humans had big wars that lasted for years. Millions of people died, but humans never stopped fighting. They never forgot how to fight. Vextar showed his teeth. Maybe he was trying to smile, but it looked mean. He said human wars did not matter. The Zalthar had technology that humans could not understand. Their weapons were too advanced. Their shields were unbreakable. Daniel agreed that the Zalthar technology was impressive. Their faster-than-light engines were amazing. Their shields used quantum science that humans were just learning about. But Daniel said humans were very good at one thing. Humans were experts at finding new ways to kill. It was what humans did best. They learned fast and they adapted quickly. Vextar said he understood. The humans were trying to be brave. That would make defeating them more satisfying. He told Daniel again that humans had 48 hours. After that time, the Zalthar expected humans to surrender completely. Then Vextar ended the call. The screen went dark. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a moment. Everyone was quiet. Then Gregory, the young ensign, spoke up. He told Daniel the bad news. The Zalthar fleet had 237 ships. Earth only had 43 ships nearby. Most of those were cargo ships, not warships. The humans were badly outnumbered. Daniel turned to look at his crew. He had a small smile on his face. He told Karen to send a message to Earth Command. They needed to tell the leaders what was happening. Then Daniel wanted Karen to send a message back to Vextar. Karen asked what the message should say. Daniel told her to refuse the Zalthar offer. Humans would not surrender. Instead, Daniel wanted to warn Vextar. If the Zalthar fleet was still near Earth after 48 hours, humans would consider it an act of war. Humans would fight back with everything they had. Rachel spoke up. She sounded uncertain. She asked Daniel what their plan was. The Zalthar had 5 times as many ships. Their technology was clearly better. How could Earth possibly win? Daniel walked over to the window. He looked out at space. In the distance, he could see the red Zalthar ships. They looked dangerous and powerful. Daniel started to explain his thinking. Humans were going to do what they did best. They would be unpredictable. They would be creative. They would never give up, no matter what. The Zalthar had conquered 473 worlds. That was impressive. But none of those worlds were Earth. Daniel was willing to bet that the Zalthar had never fought anyone quite like humans before. Humans were different. Humans were stubborn and clever. Daniel turned back to his crew. His face became serious and determined. He told everyone to prepare for battle. He wanted to contact every ship in the solar system, every space station, every mining base, every small outpost. If something could fly and carry a weapon, Daniel wanted it ready to fight. Daniel also wanted to talk to Admiral Patricia Dawson. She was in charge of all Earth's military forces. They needed to plan together. It was time to show the Zalthar Empire what happened when someone picked a fight with humanity. The bridge became very busy. People started working at their stations. They were making calls and sending messages. They were checking weapons and running tests. Everyone had a job to do. Daniel watched them work. He felt satisfied. His crew was good. They would do their best. The Zalthar had made their first mistake. They gave Earth 48 hours to prepare. That was 48 hours to plan and get ready. Humans had fought their way to the top of the food chain on Earth. They did it through determination and cleverness. They never gave up even when things looked hopeless. The war was about to begin. Earth was going to fight in their own way. The Zalthar thought they knew what would happen. They thought this would be easy, just like all their other conquests. But they were wrong. They were about to learn something important about humans. When you threaten their home, humans become the most dangerous creatures in the universe. Commander Vextar stood in the command center of his flagship. The ship was called the Eternal Dominion. It was huge and powerful. Vextar watched a timer counting down. In 3 more hours, the human deadline would end. Then he would destroy their weak defenses. He felt satisfied. This would be easy. An officer named Kralix walked up to Vextar. Kralix was a sub-commander. His armor shell shined under the red lights of the command center. Kralix reported that the humans had not answered their ultimatum. The human fleet was still around their 4th planet. They were in a defensive formation. Vextar made a rumbling sound. He said this was what he expected. Humans were clinging to their foolish pride. It would make destroying them even more enjoyable. Kralix continued his report. He said there was something strange happening. Human civilian facilities were broadcasting fake military signals. It looked like the humans were trying to trick them. Vextar's mouth parts clicked together. He was amused. A decoy strategy? How primitive. Did humans really think such simple tricks would confuse Zalthar targeting systems? Kralix said it was unlikely, but he recommended staying alert. The humans might be trying some kind of deception. Vextar dismissed the concern. He said it was noted but irrelevant. No amount of clever tactics could overcome the huge difference in power. When the deadline expired, they would advance in their standard formation. They would sweep aside the human defenses like dust in a storm. The countdown reached 0. Vextar straightened his large body. His 4 eyes gleamed with confidence. He gave the order. All vessels should assume attack formation. They should target human orbital facilities and military ships. Fire at will. The Zalthar fleet surged forward. 237 warships moved together perfectly. Their shields activated. The shields shimmered with quantum energy. These shields had protected them against hundreds of conquered worlds. Then the humans opened fire. The first wave of human weapons was conventional missiles and railgun rounds. These were primitive kinetic weapons. They were just chunks of metal moving very fast. They splashed harmlessly against the Zolthar shields. The energy just dispersed into space. Vextar watched with satisfaction. Human weapons were as crude as he expected. Vexitar started to say their weapons were pathetic, but suddenly alarms started screaming all around the command center. Vextar spun toward the tactical display. His eyes went wide with shock. Shield integrity was dropping on multiple vessels. Unknown electromagnetic interference was hitting all defensive frequencies. Kralix shouted in alarm. 14 Zolthar ships showed red warning lights. Their shields were flickering and failing, and in that moment the humans struck again. This time they did not use missiles. They used focused particle beams. These beams punched through the gaps in the shields with perfect accuracy. 3 Zolthar destroyers exploded as their reactor cores were hit. 2 more went dark as their main systems failed. Vextar roared orders. All ships should take evasive action. Restore shields immediately. But the humans were not finished. Small craft emerged from behind nearby asteroids. These were the converted cargo haulers and civilian ships. They swarmed the Zolthar formation like angry insects. Each one carried electromagnetic pulse generators and whatever weapons had been attached to their hulls. On the Valiant, Daniel watched the battle. He felt grim satisfaction. He ordered his crew to target the command ship. All weapons should fire at maximum power. Rachel should hit them with another pulse sequence. Rachel reported that the pulse generators were at 80% capacity. She counted down. 3, 2, 1, and fired. The Eternal Dominion shields wavered. Another electromagnetic pulse washed over them. For exactly 4.5 seconds, a gap appeared in the quantum field. The Valiant's railgun rounds found their target. The impacts were not catastrophic, but they were something the Zolthar had not experienced in centuries. Their flagship was damaged. Vextar stumbled as the command center shook. He shouted that this was impossible. Human weapons should not be able to penetrate their defenses. Kralix explained what was happening. The humans were targeting their communication and sensor frequencies. They were creating temporary disruptions in the shield matrix. The humans had analyzed their defensive systems and found a weakness nobody knew existed. Vextar's mouthparts ground together in fury. He ordered them to adapt shield frequencies. The quantum variants should rotate every 10 seconds. The humans would not be able to track the changes fast enough. Kralix confirmed and started implementing countermeasures. The battle raged for 3 hours. The humans fought with shocking ferocity. Converted civilian vessels made kamikaze runs. They coordinated strike patterns that exploited every momentary weakness in the Imperial shields. The humans absolutely refused to retreat even when facing overwhelming firepower. But the difference in numbers and technology was too great. One by one, human ships were destroyed. The Valiant took a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Her shields failed. Flames erupted across her hull. Gregory shouted over the alarm sirens. There were hull breaches on multiple decks. Life support was failing in several sections. Daniel grabbed the edge of his command chair as another explosion rocked the ship. He ordered all remaining power to weapons. If they were going down, they would take the flagship with them. Karen's console exploded in sparks. She was thrown backward. Blood streamed from a cut on her forehead. She reported that they had lost main weapons control. Daniel ordered them to switch to auxiliary systems. He told Rachel to fire one more pulse with everything they had left. Rachel's voice was steady despite the chaos. She reported that the generators were burned out. They were out of tricks. Daniel looked around his destroyed bridge. His wounded crew was still fighting to keep the ship working. They had done everything right. They used every advantage. They fought with everything they had, and it was not enough. Daniel spoke into the communication system. He addressed all ships. This was Captain Carter speaking. All ships should fall back to Earth orbit. Regroup with the planetary defenses. They had bloodied the enemy. Now they needed to make the Zolthar pay for every inch they took. As the surviving human vessels limped away from the battle zone, Vextar surveyed the damage to his fleet. 18 ships were completely destroyed. 37 more showed significant damage. The humans had extracted a terrible price for what should have been a simple opening engagement. Vextar spoke quietly to Kralix. He told him to revise his previous assessment of the humans. Kralix asked what the new assessment should be. Vextar watched the retreating human ships on his tactical display. He said the humans were not primitives. They were warriors. Dangerous warriors who refused to accept their own defeat. He paused. His 4 eyes narrowed. This meant they could not afford to underestimate the humans again. The first battle was over. The Zalthar had won, but barely, and the cost had been much higher than anyone expected. Vextar realized that conquering Earth was not going to be as easy as he thought. These humans were different from other species. They were clever, adaptable, and absolutely relentless. The Zalthar fleet began moving toward Earth again, but now they moved more carefully. They kept their formation tighter. They were ready for more tricks. Vextar knew the next battle would be even harder. The humans had learned from this fight too. They would have new strategies ready, and they clearly had more surprises waiting. For the first time in his long military career, Vextar felt something unfamiliar. It was a small seed of doubt. Maybe the humans could not win, but maybe they could make victory cost more than it was worth. That was a dangerous realization. It meant this war might not end the way the Zalthar Empire expected. Admiral Patricia Dawson sat in a secret room deep under the city of Geneva. This room was called the War Room. It was full of computers and screens. The screens showed information from all over Earth and space. Around a big round table sat many important military leaders. They came from different countries all over Earth. Normally, these countries did not always work together, but today was different. Today, Earth faced a threat that could destroy everyone. General Liu Chen spoke first. He was from the Pan-Asian Coalition. This was a group of countries in Asia that worked together. Liu said their weapons in space were ready. They had also started making new missiles. These missiles were simple but effective. They were basically big chunks of metal that moved very fast. When something moves fast enough, it can destroy almost anything. Liu said they could make many of these missiles quickly. A man named Pierre Laurent spoke next. He was a commander from the European Federation. Pierre said Europe had gathered all their warships. They had 17 ships that could fight and 23 ships that provided support. It was not many ships compared to what the Zalthar had, but they were ready to fight. Patricia nodded and looked at the information on her screen. She touched the screen and numbers appeared everywhere. The numbers showed ship positions, weapons, and how many people might die. The numbers were not good. Earth did not have enough ships or weapons to win easily. Patricia asked about unusual weapons. She looked at a man named Henry Cole. Henry was a scientist. He was in charge of creating new and strange weapons for Earth. Henry was thin and his hair was always messy, but he was very smart. Henry got excited when Patricia asked him this question. He leaned forward and started explaining. His team had been studying the Zalthar shields. They used information that Captain Daniel Carter had sent them. The Zalthar shields were amazing. They used something called quantum entanglement. This made the shields nearly impossible to break through. Normal weapons just bounced off. Patricia asked Henry about the word nearly. Did that mean the shields had a weakness? Henry smiled in a strange way. His eyes looked a little crazy. Yes, he said. There was a weakness. The shields had to let certain signals through. Otherwise, the Zalthar ships would be blind. They could not see or communicate. Henry's team had found 7 different frequencies that the shields allowed through. If humans could overload these frequencies with special electromagnetic pulses, they might be able to create small gaps in the shields. General Liu asked how long these gaps would last. Henry admitted they would only last 3 to 7 seconds. Maybe even less if the Zalthar figured out what was happening and adapted. But that should be enough time to shoot through the gap and hit the ship. Patricia tapped her fingers on the table. She was thinking. It was not much, but it was something. It gave them a chance. She asked what else they could do. Pierre pulled up a map on the big screen. The map showed space around Earth. It showed the asteroid belt where people had built mining colonies. Pierre said the miners had volunteered to help. They were going to pretend their bases were military targets. They would put fake signals on their equipment to trick the Zalthar. If the Zalthar thought the mining bases were important, they might split up their fleet to attack them. A woman named Elizabeth Walker continued the idea. She was a general from North America. Elizabeth said if the Zalthar split their fleet, humans could attack the smaller groups. It was an old military trick called divide and conquer. The Zalthar would not expect humans to use their civilian buildings as bait. A man named Frank Martinez spoke up. He was a colonel from South America. Frank said the plan was crazy. The mining bases were where people lived and worked. They would be destroyed. Pierre responded quietly. He said it was the miners' idea. Every single mining colony had voted. They all agreed to do it. They understood what was at stake. If Earth fell, everyone would die anyway. The room became silent. Patricia looked at each person around the table. She saw the same determination in their eyes that she felt inside herself. This was humanity at its best. When faced with extinction, people did not run away. They fought. They helped each other. They did whatever was necessary. Patricia told everyone what they were going to do. Humans could not match the Zolthar in technology, so they would not try. Instead, they would use every trick they knew. They would fight dirty. They would be unpredictable. Henry needed to give his electromagnetic pulse devices to every ship in the fleet. Patricia did not care if he had to build them by hand. Henry grinned and said he had already started working on it. Patricia then told General Liu to work with the mining colonies. She wanted plans to evacuate all the people if things went wrong. If the plan failed, she wanted those people to be safe. Liu said he understood. Patricia then spoke to General Elizabeth. Elizabeth would be in charge of Earth's defenses in orbit. If the Zolthar broke through the fleet, Elizabeth would be the last line of defense. She had to make every shot count. Elizabeth's face became grim. She promised that the Zolthar would not reach Earth's surface while she was alive. Patricia stood up. Everyone else stood up too. Patricia told them they had 36 hours left before the Zolthar deadline ended. The Zolthar expected humans to surrender. Instead, humans were going to show them something new. They were going to show the Zolthar what humans could do when they were desperate. Patricia paused and looked at each commander carefully. She said this was not about having better technology or bigger weapons. This was about willpower, about refusing to quit no matter how bad things looked. The Zolthar had conquered hundreds of worlds, but those worlds did not have one important advantage. Colonel Frank asked what that advantage was. Patricia smiled coldly. She said those other worlds did not have 10,000 years of experience killing each other. Humans did, and humans had become very, very good at it. The commanders left to do their jobs. Patricia stayed in the room alone. She stared at the big screen. It showed the Zolthar fleet hanging in space. The ships were red and looked like a knife pointed at Earth's heart. 237 enemy ships against only 43 human vessels, and most of the human ships were not even proper warships. The odds were terrible. The situation looked hopeless. Victory seemed impossible, but Patricia had studied military history her whole life. She knew one thing for certain. Humans had overcome worse odds before. They survived ice ages that should have killed them. They survived diseases that wiped out millions. They survived world wars with nuclear weapons. Humans climbed from living in caves to traveling between planets. They did it through stubborn determination. The Zolthar were about to learn why that mattered. In orbit around Mars, Daniel watched cargo ships being changed into warships. Workers were attaching missile launchers to ships that were designed to carry supplies. They were welding armor plates onto civilian vessels. Even small private yachts were being fitted with guns. Everyone was working as fast as they could. Karen walked up to Daniel. She was on an observation deck looking out at the work. Karen told Daniel that the Valiant was ready. Henry's electromagnetic pulse generators were installed and working. They had tested them. Everything was as ready as it could be. Daniel nodded slowly. He asked about the crew. How were they feeling? Karen was honest. She said they were scared. But they were also determined. Nobody had asked to leave. Nobody wanted to run away. They all wanted to fight. Daniel said that was good. Fear kept people sharp. It made them careful. When people stopped being afraid, that was when they made mistakes. He turned to look at Karen. He told her she needed to understand something important. They might not survive this battle. The Zolthar had every advantage. But humans had one thing the Zolthar did not have. Humans were fighting for their home, for their families, for everyone they loved. That had to count for something. Karen looked Daniel in the eyes. She said it counted for everything, and if they were going to die, they would take as many Zolthar with them as possible. Daniel smiled. That was exactly the right attitude. He told Karen they were going to show these galactic conquerors what humans were made of. Admiral Patricia stood in the orbital command station high above Earth. She watched the Zolthar fleet advancing toward their final defensive line. The first battle had cost humanity dearly. 23 ships were destroyed. 14 more were too damaged to fight. But they had proven something crucial. The Zolthar could be hurt. General Elizabeth appeared on the communication screen. Her face looked tired but determined. She told Patricia that all orbital platforms were armed and tracking targets. They had adjusted their targeting systems based on data from the first battle. They would get better shield penetration this time. Patricia said that was good. She asked about the civilian evacuation. How many people had been moved to safety? Elizabeth said 92% were evacuated. The remaining 8% were volunteer defense forces. They refused to leave their posts. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. So many people were willing to die for their planet. It made what she was about to do both easier and harder. She turned to Henry. The scientist had barely left his station for 3 days. She asked about the final contingency plan. Henry looked up from his console. His eyes were bloodshot but alert. The gravity well generators were in position, but it was completely untested at this scale. Henry had no idea if it would even work. And if it did work, the side effects could be catastrophic. Patricia asked what he meant by catastrophic. Henry explained they were talking about creating artificial gravitational distortions near a planet. In the best case, they would disrupt the Zalthar fleet and damage their ships. In the worst case, they could destabilize the moon's orbit, or trigger earthquakes that would devastate Earth's surface. Patricia asked what would happen if they did nothing. Henry met her gaze steadily. If they did nothing, the Zalthar would break through their defenses. They would bombard the planet. They would enslave or kill everyone. So it was a choice between maybe catastrophic and definitely catastrophic. Patricia nodded slowly. She told Henry to prepare to activate on her signal. And if this worked, she would give him a medal. If it did not work, well, they probably would not be around to worry about it. The Zalthar fleet entered the engagement zone. This time there was no hesitation, no warning shots. They opened fire with every weapon they had. They were determined to overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer firepower. The orbital platforms responded immediately. Particle beams lanced out from dozens of positions. The targeting computers had analyzed every second of the previous battle. The improved penetration was immediate. 7 Zalthar ships lost shields within the first minute. 3 of them exploded as their vulnerable systems were hit, but the Imperial fleet pressed forward. Their return fire was devastating. One by one, the massive platforms began to fall. Their wreckage tumbled toward Earth's atmosphere in trails of fire. Elizabeth reported that Platform 7 was gone. Platform 12 had lost all weapons. Platform 3 was in trouble. Then the transmission cut off as Platform 3 vanished in a brilliant flash. Patricia's hands clenched into fists. They had known this moment would come. They had planned for it. But watching Earth's last line of defense crumble was harder than she imagined. She spoke quietly to Henry. She told him to activate the gravity well generators, all of them. Maximum intensity. Henry's fingers flew across his console. Generators 1 through 15 were activating. The gravitational distortion was focusing on specific coordinates. Intensity was at maximum. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to ripple around the Zalthar fleet. On the Eternal Dominion, alarms screamed. The artificial gravity well took hold of the fleet. Ships that had been advancing in perfect formation suddenly found themselves being pulled in different directions. Conflicting gravitational forces grabbed each ship differently. Hulls groaned under the stress. Navigation systems failed. The distortion created havoc with their sensors. Vextar roared in fury. He demanded to know what was happening. Kralix shouted back his report. Unknown gravitational anomaly. Their ships were being pulled off course. Collision alerts were going off across the entire fleet. As Vextar watched in horror, 2 of his cruisers were dragged together by the artificial gravity. Their hulls crumpled on impact. Another destroyer tumbled end over end. Its crew was helpless as gravitational forces tore the ship apart. Vextar commanded them to increase power to structural integrity fields. All ships should use emergency thrust to get away from the anomaly. But the humans were not finished. As the Zalthar fleet struggled against the gravity well, the few remaining orbital platforms concentrated their fire on vulnerable targets. Without their perfect formation, the Zalthar ships could not provide mutual shield support. Their losses mounted rapidly. Daniel commanded what remained of the Earth Defense Force fleet from the damaged Valiant. He saw the opening the gravity well created. He ordered all ships to execute attack pattern Omega. They should hit the enemy while they were disorganized. Focus on damaged vessels and finish them off before they could recover. The human ships surged forward with weapons blazing. They had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Karen coordinated the targeting from her rebuilt console. Her head was wrapped in bandages. Gregory pushed the Valiant's damaged engines to their limits. He weaved through the chaotic battlefield with desperate skill. For 15 brutal minutes, the battle raged in complete chaos. The gravity well continued to wreak havoc on the Zalthar formation. Human ships darted in and out like sharks attacking wounded prey. Slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. Then Henry's worst fears were realized. Henry shouted to Patricia. The gravity well was destabilizing. If they did not shut it down in the next 60 seconds, the cascade effect would be catastrophic. Patricia demanded to know what would happen. Henry's voice was shaking. It would create a localized singularity, a black hole. It would be small and temporary, but powerful enough to cause massive destruction. Patricia did not hesitate. She ordered Henry to shut it down immediately. The gravity well generators powered down. The artificial distortion collapsed as quickly as it had appeared. But the damage to the Zalthar fleet was catastrophic. 43 more ships were destroyed or disabled. Their perfect formation was shattered. Their air of invincibility was broken. Vexitar stared at the tactical display. His 4 eyes were wide with disbelief. In less than an hour, the humans had reduced his fleet by nearly a third. They had used weapons he had never encountered. They used tactics that defied conventional military doctrine. They showed a level of desperation that bordered on insanity. Kralik spoke quietly. Perhaps they should consider a strategic withdrawal. They could regroup and request reinforcements. Vexter said no. The word came out hard and final. They were the Zalthar Imperium. They did not retreat from primitives. They did not flee from inferiors. They would crush the humans no matter the cost. But even as he spoke the words, Vextar felt something he had not experienced in his long military career. Doubt. These humans were not primitives. They were something far more dangerous. A species that refused to acknowledge when they were beaten. A species that would use any weapon, take any risk, make any sacrifice rather than surrender. Vextar looked at his remaining ships on the display. He had started with 237 vessels. Now he had less than 170 operational ships. And they still had to fight through Earth's surface defenses. They still had to conquer a planet with billions of armed inhabitants. How many more ships would he lose? How many more crew members would die? For the first time, Vextar began to wonder if victory was worth the price. The Zalthar Empire had never failed to conquer a world. But they had never faced anyone like humans before. These creatures fought with a combination of intelligence, creativity, and sheer stubbornness that was unlike anything in the galaxy. The battle paused. Both fleets needed time to regroup and assess damage. But everyone knew the fighting was not over. The final confrontation was still to come. And when it did, it would determine the fate of Earth and perhaps the future of humanity in the galaxy. 3 days passed after the gravity well engagement. Both fleets hung in a tense standoff near Earth. The Zalthar had lost 68 ships. That was nearly 30% of their original force. The humans had lost 37 of their 43 vessels. Only 6 operational warships remained, including the heavily damaged Valiant. On paper, the Zalthar still had overwhelming superiority. In practice, Commander Vexitar found himself facing an impossible situation. Kralix reported that the humans had refused their latest surrender demand. The humans stated that as long as a single ship remained operational, they would continue fighting. Vextar studied the tactical projection with growing frustration. His remaining ships could certainly destroy the pathetic remnants of the human fleet. They could bombard Earth's surface, but the cost would be catastrophic. The humans had demonstrated an alarming capacity for innovative warfare. They had turned civilian vessels into weapons. They exploited weaknesses in Zalthar shields that had not been identified in 500 years of conquest. They deployed experimental technology that bordered on suicidal recklessness. What would humans do if pushed to the edge of extinction? Would they ram their remaining ships into Zalthar vessels? Would they detonate nuclear weapons in close proximity, accepting mutual destruction? Would they deploy more of their insane gravity weapons, risking the destruction of their own planet? Vextar did not know, and that uncertainty was dangerous. Vextar asked Kralix about casualty projections for a final assault on the planet. Kralix's mouth parts clicked nervously. Estimated additional losses would be 40 to 70 ships. The humans had concealed defensive installations across their surface. Ground combat would be problematic. They had billions of armed inhabitants. There was no central government they could force to surrender. 70 more ships. That would leave the Imperium's expeditionary force with fewer than 100 vessels. That was barely enough to maintain control of their existing territories, certainly not enough to complete a successful conquest of Earth. And even if they succeeded, what then? The Zalthar economy depended on conquered worlds providing resources and labor. Earth was valuable, but not if its population had to be exterminated to secure it. And these humans had made it clear they would never submit. Vextar's four eyes narrowed as he came to a realization. The humans did not need to win. They just needed to make victory too expensive to be worth the cost. That was a dangerous strategy, and it was working. Vextar told Kralix to open a channel to the human command. Kralix stared at him in shock. He asked if Vextar was certain. Vextar said he was. Open the channel. Admiral Patricia appeared on the display. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were alert and defiant. Behind her, Captain Daniel stood at attention. His uniform was torn and scorched, but his bearing was still military precise. Patricia spoke coldly. She asked if Vextar had called to accept their terms of surrender. Despite everything, Vextar felt a flicker of respect. The humans had less than a dozen functional warships left. Their defenses were in ruins, yet they still spoke as if they held the superior position. Vextar began carefully. The Zalthar Imperium had conquered 473 worlds. They had never failed to complete a military objective. They had never retreated from an inferior force. Patricia replied that this would be a new experience for them. Because humans were not surrendering. They were not backing down. Every ship the Zalthar destroyed would cost them 2 of their own. Every kilometer of ground they took would be paid for in blood. Humans would fight in orbit, on the surface, in every city and every house. And when the Zalthar finally stood on the ashes of Earth, they would have lost so much that their empire would crumble trying to hold what they had taken. Vextar was silent for a long moment. Then with great difficulty he asked what their terms were. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he was a military commander. A good military commander knew when to recognize an unwinnable situation. Patricia glanced at Daniel, who gave a slight nod. She stated their terms. The Zalthar would withdraw their fleet from the solar system immediately. They would broadcast to all their subject worlds that humanity successfully defended their territory. And they would agree to a non-aggression pact. Humans would not seek revenge, but if the Zalthar ever returned, humans would be ready. Vextar asked what humans would give in exchange. Patricia said in exchange, the Zalthar could leave with their remaining ships and crews intact. They could return to their empire without losing more vessels, and they could tell their superiors that they encountered a species too troublesome to conquer, an intelligent strategic decision rather than a humiliating defeat. Vextar felt his mouth parts grind together in frustration. The humans were offering him a way to save face, to retreat without technically admitting failure. It was clever and it was infuriating. He asked what guarantee they had that humanity would not attempt expansion into Zalthar territory. Daniel stepped forward. He told Vextar to be perfectly clear about something. Humans did not want the Zalthar Empire. They did not want their worlds. All humans wanted was to be left alone. But if the Zalthar came back, if they threatened Earth again, humans would not stop at defending themselves. They would hunt down every ship sent against them. They would reverse engineer Zalthar technology. And they would make sure every species the Zalthar conquered knew that the mighty Zalthar Imperium could be beaten. Vextar said bitterly that human pride would be their undoing. Daniel smiled grimly. That was rich coming from Vextar. Humans were not the ones who declared war on a species they knew nothing about. They were not the ones who assumed superior technology guaranteed victory. The Zalthar started this. Humans were giving them the chance to end it without losing everything. Vextar looked at the tactical display one more time. He saw the red markers of his remaining ships. He saw the blue markers of the stubborn human vessels that refused to die. He thought about the 68 ships he had lost, the thousands of crew members who would never return home. And he thought about what his superiors would say if he returned having lost the entire expeditionary force, trying to conquer a single primitive planet. Very well, he said finally. The Zalthar Imperium accepted their terms. They would withdraw immediately. The transmission ended. Vextar stood in the command center, feeling the weight of his decision settling over him. He gave the order quietly. All ships should set course for home, maximum speed. As the Zalthar fleet began its retreat, Kralix approached cautiously. He told Vextar that he made the right decision. They would have won eventually, but the cost would have been too high. Vextar interrupted him. He said he knew. But that was not what troubled him. Kralix asked what troubled him then. Vextar turned to look at the blue-green world they were leaving behind. He said they had encountered hundreds of intelligent species across the galaxy. Some were peaceful, some were warlike, some were advanced, some were primitive, but never had they encountered a species quite like humans. Kralix asked how humans were different. Vextar spoke slowly. He said humans were not the strongest. Their technology was not the most advanced. But they possessed something the Zalthar did not have. An absolute refusal to accept defeat, no matter how certain it appeared. They would sacrifice everything, risk everything, destroy everything if necessary rather than submit. He paused, his four eyes reflecting the distant stars. He told Kralix to mark his words. In 100 years, maybe less, humanity would be a major power in the galaxy, not because they were stronger, but because they were too stubborn to know when they should lose. On Earth, in the command center beneath Geneva, Patricia watched the Zalthar fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel. Around her, the staff erupted in cheers. People hugged each other. Some cried with relief and exhaustion. Daniel appeared on the communications screen. His face showed the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. He said they did it. They actually did it, Patricia corrected him gently. They survived. There was a difference. They lost thousands of people. 37 ships. Multiple orbital stations. The cost was terrible. Daniel repeated that they survived. And they taught the galaxy something important. Patricia asked what that was. Daniel said they taught the galaxy that humanity does not give up, that humans would fight with everything they had, use every trick they could think of, and never ever surrender as long as there was breath in their bodies. The Zalthar learned that lesson the hard way. Maybe the next species that thought about threatening Earth would remember it. Patricia looked around at her exhausted staff. She looked at the tactical displays showing their battered defenses, at the damage reports streaming in from around the planet. They had won, but it had been close. Far too close. She told Henry she wanted a full analysis of everything they learned. Every weakness they exploited. Every tactic that worked. Everything they could use to improve their defenses. Henry nodded wearily. He said he had already started, and he had about 50 new weapon concepts he wanted to develop, all inspired by watching the Zalthar shields fail. Patricia said that was good, because Daniel was right. They taught the galaxy that humans do not give up. But they also learned something equally important.